exiting our children completely from what we call public school. Let me say public school. We must be satisfied to some degree that we have a workable alternative system.
We can't underestimate the power of the kingdom. We can't underestimate the power of the life flowing through us as being demonstrated inside of the earth.
I think on the last point of that, I think when we're looking back at the Ekklesia in its evolution, in a sense, we have to understand that the attitude around education within that period was very, very different.
What I realized as I've gotten older and as they've moved out and formed their own families, every time we have a celebration, one of the things they mention over and over in the cards that they give me is, thank you for your example.
Hello, and welcome to Unlock the Kingdom Within You. This podcast explores the profound truth about what it means to be born into the kingdom, not a religion. On this podcast, we challenge the religious and denominational norms which shackle us from expressing the liberty of Christ by exploring the kingdom, the Ekklesia, and citizenship. If you're born into the kingdom but lost in religion, then this channel is just for you. So thank you for listening, and don't forget to subscribe.
On one side, when we're talking about, in the UK, we talk about faith schools, then we have independent schools, then we have grammar schools, then we have comprehensive schools. And I think that the key thing here is, it's interesting between grammar and comprehensive schools, there's this issue of class. It's a massive conversation amongst parents, amongst politicians, about whether grammar school should even exist anymore. And there's this idea of ensuring that it's equal access into education. But fundamentally, we all know that parents will move from one region to another just to get close enough to a particular school because they believe that will, in the competitive economic class system, they believe that their child will get that advantage. And so in some regards, Orthodox church schools are actually profoundly sought after, but not for Christ, but more because of the educational system that they provide very well that raises people in society. Now, I say this because the challenge then for the young Christian couple on the ground, for example, who just got married, I find there's a lack of conversation about, well, how are you going to raise up your children? It's like the counseling is to get them through the door of marriage, but what about building a family? This idea that the marriage is based upon the idea that you're commissioned to build a house. That's the purpose of marriage. Marriage isn't the ceremony, it doesn't stop there. It's the beginning of the launching of the laying foundation of building a home that will produce citizens. That's the purpose of it. That's why we call the marriage an institution of building of blocks of society. So I think it's a really important question because there is a way I think that we must raise our children that I would say definitely at a young age, at the weaning age, especially into preschool, that you definitely want to be have the parents involved because it stabilizes the child and builds them. But when it comes to the education that is in effect implemented afterwards, the challenge is, and I say it like this, just like pastors lay their hands on congregants and direct them, well, in the same way, when you're moving your child into the national state system, there is an element of laying on of hands going on that you have to factor in. And that's because you're giving the child access 7 hours a day, to an educational system that is designed not necessarily for mastery, but information. Anyone else wanted to come in on that?
Yeah, I think before we could really begin to think about exiting our children completely from what we call public school, let me say public school, we must be satisfied to some degree that we have a workable alternative system. I think that if we pull our children out of the mad system, as mad as it is, we take them out of that system and bring them into this underdeveloped and understand where church is at. Church in its current form, religious, backward, provincial, and you bring children into that particular environment, we might be doing more harm than good. Yeah. So there must be, I think, between now and when we could really respond to that question in terms of taking our children out of the public system, my comment is we need to build a workable alternative system that we know has the capability to generate the kind of citizens that we believe God wants them to be. Right now, I still don't think, and I could be wrong, I still don't think that the church in its current form is at the place where they could really have this conversation and take it beyond conversation to applicability and functionality.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Kelvin?
I agree with that as well. We really have to go back to the point of renewing our mind, renewing our thinking, and letting go of what is not working. It's simple. So we have to really get God's plan and this idea on how to really do this and cooperate. I'm of the belief that if you are raising a kingdom child, right, that they will become a great citizen in the society. I really believe that it starts there, that the best citizen is a kingdom citizen inside of the culture, because their ethics are going to be higher, their morals are going to be higher, their lives are going to be higher. I mean, think about this. You bring, like Andy was saying, you bring a child into that environment that is very hostile. Who's to say that child in that school can't be a light to others, and even win them just through demonstration and becoming influences there? So we can't underestimate the power of the kingdom. We can't underestimate the power of the life flowing through us as being demonstrated inside of the earth. So that's what I would say on that.
Yeah, I think on the last point of that, I think when we're looking back at the Ekklesia in its evolution, in a sense, we have to understand that the attitude around education within that period was very, very different. And in fact, fundamentally, the processes in place, again, the rites of passage that were in place, the idea that you trained up children often into the business of their parents, there were guilds, there were institutions through which they would be crafted in, and those institutions underpin the society. It's a whole different kettle of fish in terms of the way that it worked. And so I think, I do agree, I think we do have to ensure that this education becomes a really important element of the Ekklesia as a strategy that must be resourced. You know, if a community is growing within a particular region, just like it needs to embed community, education, governance, and initiatives, or economy, fundamentally, education needs to be at the heart of it, and there must be a coherent strategy that says we have a responsibility as custodians of the kingdom to ensure that we develop a strong history, heritage, and inheritance amongst the legacy of our children, and we need to develop and build educational institutions and methods that are going to assist the continuity of that. And unfortunately, often in our gatherings, rather than our assemblies, I'll say most of our gatherings don't focus on that. And often when they do focus on it, it's as a result of a reaction to society, not necessarily part of a strategy, which is about the continuity of the kingdom. Jockey, just back to you for another question.
Yeah. So next question is, are you saying that all Christian parents should be homeschooling and not taking their children to a state school? I think we might have touched on that.
I find that interesting. The concept of homeschooling is interesting. So I homeschooled my son, and especially as a byproduct of running the school. I didn't think that homeschooling should be treated as a separate thing. I thought it should be treated as the first thing. It's like whether or not my children, learning is ongoing. That's why we talk about the difference between teaching and training and coaching for that matter. So if learning is always ongoing, just that ownership that I need to school my children, I think is the fundamental issue here. And I think that that should be the priority, regardless of the location and regardless of the different varying types of application. So it shouldn't be homeschooled or schools. It should be homeschooled is a priority where parents have taken the responsibility. They might raise their children personally for a short period of time and then put them into school. They might raise them right the way through into adulthood. I accept that it comes down to resources and the challenges that come sometimes with those resources. We're getting those resources. Ivan, what do you think?
I think learning's happening all the time, whether we recognize that we're teaching or training or not. My boys are 45 and 43 years old, and they watched me every day. They watched my wife and I every day. And they saw how we dealt with stress, financial challenges, neighbors, business transactions. They were learning every day. And what I realized as I've gotten older and as they've moved out and formed their own families, every time we have a celebration, one of the things they mention over and over in the cards that they give me is, thank you for your example. Thank you for your example of what it means to be a person of integrity. Thank you for your example of what it means to be an honest person. I mean, there were a number of challenges that I faced. I could have chosen to cheat the system, or chosen to lie, or to be a thief, or to choose a route that is less than honorable. And I made tough decisions to hold the line, to walk at a higher level, to decide I'm going to be a person of conscience and a person of integrity and of ethics. And I'm going to model that for my kids. And it's paid huge benefits in terms of the relationship that we have with our kids and our grandkids, and the impact that they're having in society in their own networks and realms. Now, I'm not touting myself to be a perfect person. I recognize I made errors and I made mistakes. In addition to making those mistakes, I learned from them personally, and then I debriefed my mistakes with my kids and said, look, I made a stupid decision in this particular situation, and here's why it was stupid, when I recognized that I had made this bad decision. And they learned from those things. My example is just one person, one family, but that replicated across the globe will have an impact on the nature of culture and the nature of who we are as citizens. So that's the importance of education. That's the importance of teaching values and ethics in our educational systems.
Designed by Citizens for Citizens, the Nation Builders app is designed for you to get involved with building the society Jesus had in mind. The app is built upon 4 principles: connect, communicate, community, and collaborate. Connect through your very own digital profile. Share your thoughts and ideas through engaging posts, videos, and events. Communicate. Develop long-lasting friendships with fellow citizens through your own personal inbox. Receive real-time alerts on new comments, messages, likes, and friend requests. Community. Our open door policy means you can connect with online communities and special interest groups to fellowship together. Collaborate. Our civic spaces focus on cultivating the civic life of citizens through community, education, governance, and enterprise. Don't delay. Sign up for free now at www.nationbuilders.community or download our free Nation Builders app on Play Store.
I would just like to say regarding like homeschooling, my wife just reminded me of our environment here in Los Angeles. The Jews that are heavily populated in a particular area, man, I'm telling you, you see them on Saturday, they are walking, they're with their families. You see a public demonstration of part of their culture and the way that they are. And so I just say that not to just talk about what they believe or anything like that, but just the issue of demonstrating and how orderly and how, what it projects in a culture that is very, very loose and do your thing, do whatever you want to do. They are a staple and a light in the community of, importing their own way of doing things before in an existing culture. I think it's commendable.
Can I just kind of throw a comment in that I think it's something that you said, Fred, about in passing, you made a comment that we need to begin to at least contribute towards these initiatives. I have found that we can no longer treat education as a superfluous component. It cannot be seen as a sixth finger. Can't be seen like that anymore. It has to be seen as a critical building block in the formation of a society, whether that society be kingdom society or whichever society you find yourself in. And when I say it can't be treated as a superfluous component, it means that we must be willing to contribute towards the bringing forth of an entity that we believe is consistent with the model of God. When I say that I'm really getting to this. I have found that people talk kingdom, but at core, they are still very selective. And they don't put their money where their mouth is. So at the end of the day, there's so many remarkable kingdom objectives that are dying because they are underfinanced. Why? Because a lot of people talk about it, but nobody's willing to contribute towards the creation of it. And what happens in most circles is this. You get a guy going and do the religious Pentecostal nonsense. They have greater ability to siphon monies out of these Christians than you and I, who's trying to bring great ideas. Even people on platforms like these, they sit and they celebrate the concepts, and they go to church tomorrow morning and throw all their money behind a guy who is engaged in religious asthma. When I say asthma, I want to tell you today that the Lord, I call that religious asthma. That's an asthmatic condition. But at the end of the day, we need people who are prepared to say, listen, this is a critical component that we have to put our monies into. Let me give you a final example here. There was a time when the city of Hershey in Pennsylvania was one of the poorest and one of the most crime-riddled part of America. One man had a vision to change that city around. And he started by making chocolate in his kitchen, not designed to give sugar diabetes to the world, but the man had a vision to change his society. Today, all of you eat Hershey chocolate bar. One man had a passion to change his city. He saw the trajectory of it, and this guy began to make chocolate. And the monies he got from that chocolate, he established a school where he bought all of the poor children who were involved in crime and gave them an education, gave families an opportunity to, at least you don't have to pay for your child at boarding school. All these kids began to flood the institution that Hershey built, to the point that literally within the space of 5 years, the city of Hershey was radically transformed. One man having a passion. If we on this call could only capture a percentage of that, and instead of throwing our money here, then everywhere else, begin to truly build something that is equal to or even superior to what Hershey did back in the day, we could really begin to have a different conversation today than talking about what we can do. We'll be talking about how we can improve.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think one of the things that for me, I think where education becomes really important within the context of with what we're discussing and nation building is the idea of designing citizenship. I think that's not a concept that is well known or understood, but within the context of nationhood, citizens play a proactive role in designing the citizenry that they want to see. Now, we don't have that conversation, but we are getting there, where we start to talk about the fact that actually collaborating with Christ within the context of nation building involves designing citizenry. Right. That's an empowering thing, because actually, and you mentioned it with the gentleman there, and there's many, many like that, these are people that simply made a decision of their own accord to say, I'm going to make a change, and I'm going to create something new within this society that will be hopefully pointed to as a standard and become something that is a trend that others look to also model. And I think that's the key thing here. Education, along with community governance and economy, education is a really important mechanism to support the design work. It's not by itself. It's not in isolation. It requires the others involved in a community and in communities talking about it and building it out and living it out, that then it becomes a model that people can interface with and interact with and engage with. So designing citizenship, I think, is a powerful thing for us to embrace. Joke, is there any other questions, Joke?
Yeah, question from Jackie. The role of the man in education and society building is evidently important, but in our current education systems, the early education is heavily populated by female teachers. How do we work on that imbalance? And how do we help men see the importance of being involved in early childhood education?
Well, I know it may sound strange, and I'll obviously defer also to our panelists, but I think first of all, we need to literally resell, repackage the idea of what marriage is. Because I actually think that one of the challenges we face today is that the reason why we are struggling in society so much is because of broken homes. And the reality is that the good work of establishing a God-honoring household, that commission is vital to the success of any society. And so for men in particular, we need to re-educate along those lines so that men are considered to be fundamentally a key linchpin in the process, or key cornerstone, for want of a better word, in the process of building a house that ultimately contributes to a wider society, and by producing good citizens. So I think fundamentally we need to go back to the context of why homes, marriages, and families are priority, and how do we raise men within the context of that learn to govern and rule their households in such a way, and like I said, part of that is the rites of passage as well, in order to see that as a responsibility that has great honor with it, and is something that should be valued and given great value amongst the community.
Elijah, I am a church planter. Should our plans include a Key Stage 12 school system for our multiple churches?
I'll start
Andy,
by
why
saying,
don't you take that one?
I'll start by saying is there a vision for it? Because what you don't want to do is just kind of in an ad hoc manner, just kind of hitch this onto the many things that you're doing. Because what you're going to do, if you don't have a vision for it, then you won't point your energies towards it appropriately. So what I would suggest that you do, if you're a church planter and you've been doing what you've been doing all along, it's a good question, but I think you need to engage God and find out exactly what are the other critical components of his mission and his call as it applies to your life and your ministry, because sometimes your best role may not necessarily be one where you plant schools, but it might be where you invest in somebody who's planting it, and where you get your many churches that are being planted, that they collectively could help support and finance someone who really carries the vision and passion for doing it. I think sometimes we are all driven by a selfish agenda where we by ourselves want to become the leader of everything that's being done. So you need to at least discover inside of God and inside of your call and inside of the skill sets and the people skills that God has placed around you, whether it is inside of the agenda of God for you to do such a thing, or whether it is something you need to invest in somebody else who's doing it.
Can I ask an incisive question to Elijah?
Yeah, sure.
Elijah, please hear me. Your question is, or your statement is, I am a church planter. First of all, the question is, are you beginning to realize the difference between church and Ekklesia? What you plant as a school will be totally based on your understanding of whether you are a church planter or you are working on being part of the Ekklesia in your region. That school will reflect those 12 those multiple churches that you're wanting to help bring the school into existence for. So I would just ask that you pray and you think critically about the difference between church and Ekklesia, and God will show you what that means and implies for your passion to start this school.
I mean, I would not minimize that at all. I mean, seeking first, what is God's mind on the matter, man? I'm telling you, we cannot minimize that at all. That's a very important role, because we can save a lot of time, a lot of frustration and tears by seeking what the King wants first.
I think I like what Anderson said, and I think it's so crucial as well, in that even in the context of seeking, when we feel that there is some burden that we might have in order to establish something, the question is, do we have to establish it in isolation? You know, fundamentally, we are a part of an extension of a kingdom operating within a region, and there are other people within that region that are also an extension of that kingdom.
Yeah.
And so we need to divorce ourselves, and I use divorce in the right way in that regard, from the denominationism, from the religion, and we need to understand that we are already part of a society. It's just in realizing that we then begin to work with those people, regardless of what particular propensity they might have towards a denomination or otherwise. We need to begin to work with them in order to create something that reflects a kingdom and raises citizens, rather than reflects, as Ivan said, maybe a particular unique form or brand of Christianity. which actually is not necessarily does not necessarily truly characterize Christ. So I think it's really, really important what Ivan said there, which is actually about the fact that if this is a commission by the Lord, then in the midst of that, it's not just a commission to you in that region, it's going to be a commission to other people.
Yeah.
And it's about connecting with the other members of the wider body and citizenry of Christ to work together for that initiative, which is about bringing the true capital of the kingdom together to establish something which will have generational impact and establish the continuity of God's governance.
Yeah.
We've got a few more minutes, so Joke, any more questions?
Yeah. James, how do we purposefully break the mold of the established educational system so as to assist the innocent who are on this autonomous factory model, having no alternative?
Okay, I would start by saying to James that what's really important is whatever the Lord has given us in terms of to be creative with and innovative, we take that, we run with that. Because that's part of what becomes a disruption within society that breaks through some of the ills within the educational system and forges new paths for other people to collaborate with. So I think that's important. I think sometimes we fold our hands waiting for things to change around us rather than say, no, actually, if we've got something in our heart that we know the Lord is talking to us about, we need to make sure that we translate that vision into mission. We then bring strategy into that and we begin to cultivate it. We begin to resource it, winning other people to it. And that becomes part of the snowball effect that runs through these already existing fractures within the infrastructure of our societies and institutions. Who'd like to come in on that question?
Yeah,
Go ahead, Andy.
2 minutes.
Most of us kind of spend more time pointing finger as opposed to looking in the mirror. And I think the best way that you could approach that is by starting in the areas where you have influence yourself, which is your own constituent, maybe your own children. So the question is, how do we, I can't quote it exactly. So Joke, can you say it again for me? There's a part of it I want to kind of say.
How do we purposely break the mold of the established educational system so as to assist the innocent who are on this autonomous factory model, having no other alternative?
Okay. Yeah, thank you. In a case like that, I think I go right back to the Gandhi concept, which is like, is it Gandhi who said that? Be the change that you want to see. And I would say that start in the areas where you have responsibility, because very often we sometimes think that change is brought about by massive revolutionary overhaul. Very often, change starts by nothing more than a silent earthquake. Almost unnoticed tremors at the very core of the earth is the starting point of massive tsunamis. So when we sometimes talk about how we could bring about these changes, very often somebody asks a question like that and they are seeing the tsunami and they ignore the silent earthquake, which is your small responsibility that can so easily go unnoticed and unheralded. That's where change really starts. And so start with yourself.
Yeah, we'll finish there. So I hope you've enjoyed this particular session and the Q&As that followed.
Thank you for joining our fireside talk about the kingdom. My name is Frederick Tobin, and I hope this podcast has been a blessing to you. If you'd like to continue to receive fresh insight into the kingdom, click the notification bell to follow us. For further information about the kingdom, visit our website, www.unlockthekingdomwithinyou.com, to download your free ebook. See you soon.